So in order for us to be productive in SwiftUI, we have to understand what is SwiftUI and what is Swift. Now, Swift is the programming language used to build Apple platform applications. So for Mac OS, for iOS, for watchOS, and so forth. Right? That is the programming language. SwiftUI is a framework, meaning it's just a library, a tool that was created with different functions and different classes and so forth, that was created to allow developers to build amazing user interface. Needless to say, in order for us to be productive and create applications using SwiftUI, we must learn Swift. Okay, so what I'm going to do in the next videos and sections is I'm going to introduce to the basics of Swift in the beginning, and then we'll progress quite quickly to get into the intermediate and so forth. So the idea here is to get you acquainted with the underlying programming language, which is Swift. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. All right, so having our Xcode 11 beta open here, or just 11, depending on when you're watching this, doesn't really matter at this point. Having it open, what we're going to do is instead of opening an Xcode project, we're going to open another subset of Xcode called Playground. Now, what is Playground? Playground is a text editor connected to Xcode that allows us to work with the language per se and see the results right away. Okay, as the name implies, a playground, a place where people can go and play. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is having our Xcode open. I'm going to go to File, say New. Notice we have the option of Playground. So I'm going to say click there. All right, so what I want is just a blank playground. We can have a game, map, single view. So playgrounds can actually get a little bit more advanced, but at this point we just want a blank one so we can get started. I'm going to say Next. So in this case here, I'm going to change where I am putting my playground. Click Project there. And I already have a playground there, so I'm going to just change this to first playground like that. Okay, I'm going to just save anywhere you want. That's totally fine. Voila. The moment you do that, you notice we have our playground. Let's make this a little bit bigger so we're able to see it like that. Okay, so we have our playground. Now notice what's happening here. Playground is really cool. I enjoy it, but there are a few things that we probably should start talking about right now. There's this import UI kit. UI kit is an iOS library that allows us to build applications, and it has all sort of things inside of it. That's why we can actually see it included right away, imported into this project, first Playground. Okay, so without this, we won't be able to do all sort of things. So think of it as the actual package that contains everything we would want at this point in order for us to run our programs. And then we have this var str equals hello playground. What this is? Well, this is what we call a variable. So think of a variable as a little bucket in memory in your computer that allows you to put things into it so you can use it at a later time. Once you're done using it, it goes away. For the most part. Okay, so what are we doing here? We are creating a variable with the keyword var. We call it str, right? That's name of the variable, the name of the bucket. And then we add something inside of that bucket. In this case, we're just adding a phrase or a text. Now we know this is a text or string, or as we call it, is a string because we have double quotes. So anything inside of double quotes like that, that would be a string. Now, here's one awesome thing about Playground is that if you look to the right, there's this gray area here. In fact, we can make it bigger if we wish to do so. Let's do that. So when you do that, you can see it's empty, it's just gray. What this is what we call the console. The console is just a place where when we run this program, something's going to happen. In fact, if you go ahead and just go play like that, notice we're going to go ahead and say ready to continue. Actually, it was really fast, as you saw. Now it says hello Playground. Okay. And you can see it's just emulating exactly what we are writing to the left. So that's the beauty of using Playground. Okay, because I can come down here, for instance, create another var called name. I'm going to say is equal to Paulo, like that. If you save and go ahead and click run here, or you can just say command run, that would work too. There we go, it says Paulo. And you can see it is indeed a string because we still even have those quotes. Okay, very good. All right, so the other thing we could do also, I'm going to get rid of this. In fact, let's get rid of everything so we can actually write all ourselves. I'm going to say var, name again. I'm going to add James so I don't look like a narcissistic. All right, so there we go, name. And what I'm going to do, of course, you can go ahead and click on run again like that. It's going to go run, and it may take a little bit depending on your environment, but it's usually pretty fast. So in this particular case here, we are assigning again our variable name, the bucket we created in memory, to have James. As I said before, this is what we call a string. This means that this name bucket here, right, variable name as we call it, is of type string. So I'm going to say / and say type string. Now notice that this is what we call a comment. So whenever we want to add comments, so essentially anything we don't want Xcode to look at it as code, we just put in front of / like that. Put 2 of them, and then whatever we write here, the compiler of the program, it's not going to read it as code. It's just going to read it as just comments. Okay. So as I was saying, now name, we infer it as a type string, which means this bucket can only get strings into it. We can put only strings inside of this bucket, variable name. Now, this is one way of declaring a variable because we must declare things that we want to use. In this case, I'm declaring name as a variable and add something to it. But there are times when we don't want to actually add anything to it. We just want to create a variable, which we will add at a later time. So I would say var name, and then I will make it so that the compiler, right, the program that is behind everything that goes and looks at all the code we're writing to say, hey, what type of item are you putting here? What type of variable is this? Because you can't just put var name. It just says, okay, what that is. In fact, that's why we have this type annotation missing in pattern. This just means you have to give some sort of type. Okay. Well, to make this a type string, what we do, we put colon and say string like that. Now we're having another issue here because we already have name. In fact, let me go ahead and put like that. Comment that out. Notice we don't have any problem. So what was happening was that, well, I already used that bucket and named it name. So as you see here, you can't use the same name to point to different buckets, right? Different variables. That makes sense, right? Because then we have the name contrast, and that's not good. So in this case here, you can see we said var name colon means this is type string. So read this as name is of type string. That's what the colon means in this case. So at this point here, I could go ahead and say is equal to James again. That's fine. In fact, if you run this, it's going to say James like we saw before, right? Or, because the idea of putting it that way is that we can come down here somewhere in our program and I can say, for instance, print. Right? This print is a method, a function that allows us to print something into the screen. Now, in our case here, because we have this awesome playground here, which just spits out whatever we're writing, we really don't need to have print, but I just want to show you another way. So if I pass name, notice something cool here. It says string name. It knows, our Xcode here, playground knows that this name is of type string. So this is very helpful, isn't it? If I hit enter there, look at this. If I run here, I have a problem. What is the problem? Well, the problem is going to say here that variable defined here var name string used before being initialized. What is this? This is good. So we're making this mistake so you can see in the beginning, if you make these mistakes, you know how to solve them. What this is saying is that, well, okay, I get it, Mr. Paolo. This is very clever of you. Let me go close that down. I get it that at the top here, you created something. There is indeed this var. So this means, let me go ahead and get that variable there. So what this error means is that, well, we created a variable, we created a bucket somewhere in memory that we know is going to be of type string. So in the memory, there is a bucket ready to be used. However, this bucket hasn't been initialized. What is this initialization? Well, initializing something means we have to give a value. So it knows that, okay, the type is X, in this case a string, but what is in it? We have to put something before we print out. Because in memory, it's just going to be gibberish. The idea of having a bucket is so that we put something into it. That's why we're having this problem, which means at the bottom here, we would have to go and say something like name is equal to James, like that. Or we could have done what we did before, James like this, right? So I'm going to show you this other way right now. Notice the moment you do that, this error should go away. Let's save this and voila. Now, if I come down here and run, I should see James is showing over there. And of course, this print here is actually going to show, if we open at the bottom here in this console, this is showing whatever we added into name string James there. Okay, so it shows here, name James as well, but also because we said print, this is just a function that comes from our kit at the top there, that comes from a UI kit. So it's a function that already comes pre-packed in our Xcode here, playground. We don't have to think about it right now. We'll talk about functions later. And we pass in the name to say, hey, go ahead and print that in console. And there we go, we see James written at the bottom there. All right, so that is the first type. There are also different types. Right? The first type, of course, is string, as we saw here. And there's another type called integer, because there are times we want to add numbers. So this is a string, which means we can add text. We can put all whatever we want, as long as it's all inside of quotes like that. But there are times we want to put other kinds of variables, right? So integers is just a number. In order to create an integer, we say var, again, always the keyword. And I'm going to say age, for instance. And I'm going to make it a type, or I can just go ahead and say is equal to 12, just like that. Okay, that makes sense. If I go ahead and run like that there, it's running for a second, and voila, you see 12. And as you know by now, I could have said something var my age and say is an integer like that. And you notice also there is that code help that we see here. What this is just a way of helping us developers as we code to make things a little bit faster. The playground, the Xcode helps us to say, hey, I think you mean integer. So you don't have to type it all out. You can just go ahead and say enter, and goes ahead and complete the code for you. Pretty neat. Okay, so there we go. Now you notice something interesting that happens. Now these are two variables, even though they're the same type. So here explicitly we're saying, hey, my age will always have an integer. Okay, so because I'm using two words here, there's my age, you notice something changed. I've added this uppercase A for age. But here I didn't add that. What this is just a naming convention. We could have just added A like that. That would have worked, but it just looks funky. So it's a naming convention that allows developers to some sort of kind of have the same framework when we are all developing, right? So this is what we call camel case, okay? Which means every first letter of the second, third, fifth word that we put together has to be uppercase. So if we had another word here, my age, time, like that, you notice I would put another T that is indeed uppercase. Okay, this is what we call camel case. So you'll see this used all the time, only if you have more than one word. Very good. So at this point here, you know that if I try to print my age, it will make no sense because my age is just a variable of type int. We haven't added anything to it. But this variable age here, if I go ahead and pass in age like that and run, we should see 12. And of course, there is 12 here as well, because this is what we print. It print 12. All right, very good. So now you learn about strings and you learn about integers and how to create those or declare those variables, the types and so forth, implicitly and explicitly.